Welcome back to Purrfect Takes. I'm your host, Stephen Patton, joined as always by my co host and dear friend, Jake McQuire. And before we get into the draft discussion we have prepared for you all, we're going to talk about something that's very exciting here in Buzz City, and that's the Charlotte Hornets as we prepare for the playoffs to begin. It's looking more and more likely that we will be kind of in the play in spots, but there is a chance that if we win down the stretch, we could just be the sixth seed and be locked into the playoff picture. Tonight, we help our chances with a trip to Boston against the Celtics. And honestly, it's been a very special year watching LaMelo Ball, Con Knipple, Brandon Miller. Both Con Knipple and LaMelo Ball lead the NBA in 3 points made. Like, that's crazy just being 1-2. I don't think we've ever done that as a Hornets franchise. And with Luka Doncic's injury with the LA Lakers, like, that's how it's going to end with the year. So, Jacob, I know you're a Hornets fan. You've been a season ticket holder at one point in your life, but this is a rare place to be for the city of Charlotte. I don't think we've had this much success since probably like the '90s before we were born. So, what are your thoughts on this before we kind of kick everything off? It's an exciting time to be alive here in Charlotte.
It is exciting. I'll say my dad was a season ticket holder. I'm not that fortunate yet, but one day, hopefully, I'll be getting some season tickets with the Hornets, maybe the Panthers as well. But I was there in 2016 when the Hornets had their last playoff game. It was against the Miami Heat. It was against Dwayne Wade. That was the purple shirt game where he hadn't made a 3-pointer since sometime in December and then hit two in a row to kind of ice the game. Just Hornets luck, you know. But it seems like that kind of bad luck, bad vibes has turned the page with the guys you mentioned, LaMelo Ball, Con Knipple, who was still my rookie of the year, and Brandon Miller. Hopefully, we can win tonight against, you said the Celtics, right? And then we have the Pistons and the New York Knicks, I think, to finish the year. So hopefully we can get a couple wins there, secure our spot in the playoffs. But either way, 43, I think that's how many wins we have right now. 43 plus wins is just a blessing after being winning 20 games the last 3 years. So it's exciting to be a Hornets fan.
It is. It is. And to kind of go off of that, the Carolina Panthers, we made the playoffs for the first time since I believe 2017 this past year. So just a lot is trending up in terms of the Charlotte area and North Carolina and South Carolina for those who watch sports. And kind of going off of that, we have the draft coming up in less than a month. We're a few weeks away. And we're going to have a couple players that we're going to talk about today, and more specifically on the offensive side of the ball. We want to look at, hey, at pick 19, at pick 51, pick 83 for the Carolina Panthers, and then maybe a couple of day three flyers on the offensive side of like who are guys that potentially are on the board for the Panthers. We're going to look at players that are currently on the top 30 visits, players that we've met kind of like pro days, combine, and really just talk it out and see what makes sense to kind of keep building this team the right way. And so, what that looks like, we'll kind of break down this exercise. That at each pick, I'll give you options to kind of choose from and prospects to break down because you are a draft guru here on Purrfect Takes. And so, without further ado, I'll kick it off at 19. Looking at kind of consensus boards, kind of your board as well. I think the three players that would probably be available then, and a lot of people are kind of mocking to us. You have the offensive tackle Blake Miller out of Clemson. You have wide receiver and local native KC Concepcion, played at Vance, I believe, when he was in high school. It is now Chambers High School. And then we have a tight end that a lot of the fan base would want to see in Carolina, and Kenyon Sadiq. I have vocalized that I do not like him as a prospect, at least in the first round for the Carolina Panthers. But if you're the general manager, if you're Dan Morgan, who are you taking and why, Jacob? Based on your film study, based on your evaluations, what makes sense based on what this team needs?
So of those three players, Kenyon Sadiq, the Oregon tight end, Blake Miller, the Clemson tackle, and Concepcion, who you're right is a local guy. He actually his high school is probably 5 minutes from where we went to college at Charlotte there. So really local guy. Played at NC State as well. I have Sadiq rated the highest, but I probably I probably would go Concepcion at this point. I wrote about him last week. You can check that out at sportclt.com. But Concepcion, I think, really fits and kind of finishes the wide receiver core, at least the starting group of the wide receiver core that the Panthers have been building the past few years. And yes, it would sting to draft three wide receivers in the first round in 3 consecutive years. That's probably not the greatest use of your draft assets. But this team, the Panthers, this team really lacks explosive playability. We've been near the bottom in yards after the catch the last 2 seasons, bottom 10 in yards per play overall in the last 2 seasons. And I go back that far because that's when Dave Canales and Dan Morgan took over. And Concepcion, despite all of his issues, is an explosive player. He can get downfield, and despite the smaller frame, which isn't that small, he's a bit stronger than he looks. He's able to take stuff down the field, and I think that would mesh really well with T Mac, who already is a great possession guy, rookie of the year, and Jalen Coker, who came along toward the end of the season and had his breakout in that playoff game against the Rams, where I think he's what the third highest passing or receiving yards in a playoff game in franchise history, behind Smitty and Moose, obviously. So a trio of those three starting with Leggett developing on the bench. He can come in for some of the heavier personnel looks because I think he is a good blocker. I think he can be good at that, even if his hands aren't as consistent when he's on the field. I think Concepcion fits that receiving group really well. And while we could still use tackle depth, right, with Ike Ekwonu out, with Taylor Moton getting up there, I really think finishing the receiver group is the best thing for not only Bryce Young as you're evaluating him this year for potential extension, but for Brad Idzik, who's going to be calling plays, like seriously calling plays in regular season games for the first time in his career. So, out of all those guys, I would go Concepcion, and even in the first round, I'd probably go like Carnell Tate if he's there, right? But out of all the first round guys that are being talked about, I think Concepcion would be my pick for the Panthers fit out of all those guys.
It makes sense. I mean, with his speed, his burst, his quickness, this is a guy that is going to give kind of the man coverage looks trouble. And
Mhm.
you want that. You want guys that are going to be able to beat man coverage. I guess my question for you, and I don't know how well this is or isn't going to translate, but last year at Texas A&M, he had a 11.1% drop rate. Is that something that's concerning for you, especially with this fan base kind of dealing with some of the drops that Xavier Leggett has had in his first 2 seasons? Is that something that we're going to have to experience as well with him as a young player if we draft him? And if so, is that going to put a damper on those big plays we're looking to get out of a player of his caliber?
It's definitely concerning, right? Not only was his drop rate 11% or something, like you said last year, going back to 2024, he also had a greater than 10% drop rate. He's had 7 drops, I think, in each of the last 2 seasons. That's not great. And it's not showing improvement, which is what you want to see. And especially for someone that's a bit slimmer, he's 5'11 and just under 200 pounds. You would think that physicality may play into that. What I'll also say, however, is he hasn't had great quarterback play really at all since he's been in college. Last year at Texas A&M, if you watch their games, and this was a good team, right? They finished top 10 going into the playoff. They had no business losing any game that they were in last year. It's just that their quarterback, Marcel Reed, would often miss a lot of the deep throws or take quite a while to get to the reads when he's throwing outside the numbers. And I think that affected Concepcion a bit, but it's definitely something you need to worry about. And I'm a believer that you can kind of get rid of drops, especially seeing how Chuba Hubbard has gotten much, much better at securing the ball when he's catching balls out of the backfield. The jugs machine exists for a reason, right? So if you can just get your guy to lock in and stay 30 minutes after and before practice, right? Just spending time with the jugs. I think you can get that number down, but that's definitely the biggest blemish or concern with his game. And while it would be a bit alarming to have both Concepcion and Liget, who both have drop issues. I don't think they would see the field at the same time necessarily. So you'll have sure-handed players like Coker out there for a good portion of the time, at least in 11 personnel, right, where you have the three receivers out there.
Gotcha. No, that makes a ton of sense. Before we move on to the second round, my next question would be: hey, I gave you Blake Miller, I gave you Kenyon Sadiq. On your big board, Kenyon Sadiq is the highest rated player out of the three players I gave you. Would you take Kenyon Sadiq if KC Concepcion isn't there? Or for some reason something doesn't check out as the scouts and the people that are doing the evaluations in the Panthers front office, just something just character profile wise, the drops, it's not going to work here in Carolina. Who are you taking?
So if we're living in a world here where we're taking an offensive player in the first round, I think that's what we're doing with at least today's episode. We'll talk about defense next week, but it would really depend on who is there. We've talked, and I think we're both big believers in investing in the trenches, right? And especially after getting receiver in consecutive years, it wouldn't it wouldn't shock me, or at least I would be inclined to add to that offensive line because, like we talked about, Ike injured, probably not going to play much, or if at all, this year. And even when he was playing last year, he's improved, but I wouldn't call him a top 12 to 15 pass blocker at his position. And then we see Taylor Moton on the other side, who had played what was like 10 consecutive seasons without missing a beat. And then he misses 3 or 4 games last year. He's starting to decline a little bit in terms of his foot speed, getting out into space. So if there's a tackle there that the front office is really convicted on, I would probably lean tackle just because tight end isn't, you don't get as much return from tight end, right? From a contractual standpoint and from a just an overall value standpoint, unless your tight end is one of the best tight ends in the league. But Sadiq, I think, would fit pretty well. He's definitely or he definitely would be the most explosive tight end we've had since Greg Olson. So it wouldn't shock me if Sadiq is the pick, so to speak. But I think myself and a lot of other people would rather go with the premium position, uh, if it was, just because you get a better return on that, even if your tackle isn't going to be starting year one or isn't going to be playing the majority of snaps. And I know that goes against what Dave Canales said, that they don't draft for depth in round one, but just in terms of a process, I think I would lean more toward taking somebody who is going to contribute to the O line in the long term. And another thing too is that we're already the most expensive offensive line in the league this season, and that's without Ike playing, who's on his 5th-year option. So I think getting cheaper at the offensive line is a good thing as well.
I agree that getting younger, getting cheaper at the offensive tackle position, like you said, you brought up Taylor Moton's age concerns, that those are things that you have to plan for. And I think the front office under Brant Tillis did a good job. And he even came out and said in a meeting, like, hey, like we want to address needs in free agency. We do not want to go into the draft feeling like we have to take a certain position. You want to take best player available and be mindful of planning for the future. So we've seen that this front office loves prioritizing the trenches. And I think, like you said, if you're not going to take a guy like Casey Concepcion or another wide receiver, that taking a player of Blake Miller's caliber or another offensive tackle could be the fit. Now, moving on to pick 51, and this is, I think if you start looking at like the offensive players that are available at that point in time, it's a little thin based on guys that would probably fit our scheme and make sense for the Carolina Panthers. Two guys that have visited the team: Chase Besantis out of Texas A&M and Oscar Delp out of Georgia. You're pretty high on Oscar Delp compared to consensus. Is that a tight end that you feel like would mesh well with Tommy Tremble, JT Sanders, some of the guys that are already in the tight end room? Does he bring another skill set that you think would help elevate that group and be worth pretty much a top 50 pick?
Yeah, for Delp, I'm pretty high on him. Not to brag, but even before the pro day, I remember telling you that I would much rather take him round two than Sadiq round one, just from a value perspective. And I think Delp immediately becomes the best non Tommy Tremble blocker when you add him to the team. I think he has more receiving chops than Tremble does. I think he's kind of what they envisioned JT Sanders would be. And even as a rookie, you saw the flashes with Sanders up until that. I think it was the neck injury, right, in the Chiefs game. And so I don't know who you're removing from the tight end rotation because you have 3 guys already there, with Trimble, Sanders, and Mitchell Evans, the 5th rounder from last year. But if you want an athletic tight end over the middle that can catch passes, I'm not gonna call him Greg Olsen, but he'll definitely be the most impactful receiving option there that the Panthers will have had in a long time if he pans out. And I think he will. His production's pretty low, but if you watched any Georgia tape this past year, Gunnar Stockton is not exactly a very good passer, and he left a lot out there on the field. So I'm a big fan of Delp. And then the other guy you mentioned, Basantis, Chase Basantis, right, the guard from Texas A&M. If we're going to invest in the offensive line, my preference would be tackle or center because those are the iffy spots right now. But and we're going back to the contract point of it all. If you're gonna try to get out of Rob Hunt's deal in the future because he's gonna be making a lot of money over the next few years, I think it's wise to invest in offensive line. But I would lean tackle or center just because those are the more immediate replacement players. I think, at least for this offensive line as it's currently constructed.
I don't think when we're looking at like pick 51, there are a ton of centers that would make sense there. I
Yeah,
think when you look at maybe the third round or even like day three, there are plenty of guys that could maybe be an option there. I do like the free agent signing that we had this couple weeks ago. I'm blanking out on his name. He came from Luke Fortner, I
Luke
believe is
Fortner.
his name.
Yeah,
Yeah, from the New Orleans Saints. So again, I think he'll be a capable starter, but finding someone to develop behind him, I think, is still a priority. And like you said, I think tackle and center do need to be the point of emphasis for this front office. I like Jennings Dunker. Emmanuel Pregnon is another guy that's kind of thrown in that range. I think he'll probably be like towards the end of the first round, top of the second round, so he may not be available. My concern with you bringing up with Oscar Delp, and why I do think it's more valuable to take him in the second round compared to Kenyon Sadiq in the first round, is this is a player that hasn't caught over 300 yards in a single season. And obviously, his first couple years, he's playing behind a guy like Brock Bowers, and that's going to impact kind of your production. Like you said, his quarterback situation hasn't helped him, but you just wonder if that lack of production is something to be concerned about. Even though, from a trait standpoint, when you turn on the tape, he is very exciting to watch. That's something that'll kind of keep this front office from maybe taking a player like him on day two.
I think that's just the nature of this particular draft class. We've heard it all throughout the process that this isn't a very or relatively this isn't a very talented draft class. When a couple years ago, right, you had like Drake May, Caleb Williams, that class was really good. The year before that, the Bryce Young class was really good. And next year, I know we always say next year, but next year does project to have a lot more top end talent. So I think once you get past that first round threshold of players that you think can make an immediate impact and be immediate plus starters, you're really going to be finding prospects that have, like, or I should say, everybody's going to have at least a couple holes in their game. And for Delp, it's the production, like you're talking about. He's also a little bit stiff when he's getting out of his breaks down the field. But up until that point, I think he's pretty good at using his frame to make space. So out like between tight end and the guards you mentioned, I would probably go Delp. But if another receiver were to fall, somebody like Jeremy Bernard or maybe Bryce Lance is there, and they're really convicted on that. The guy from North Dakota State. I know you're big on Lance, and we can talk a bit more about him in a few minutes. But I'd go receiver in round two as well if they don't go in round one, just because I think you should keep turning over that receiving core until you have a true starting three that you really like.
I think it was the Athletic they were talking about. Is it Chris Brazil,
From Brazel
Tennessee,
from
Brazel?
Tennessee.
That they talked about him, like if he were to hit his ceiling, he's like a sports car that like would have issues in terms of like dependability or reliability. He has that big play over the top, runs a lot of great post routes, is that vertical threat you want in an offense. And they were trying to liken to like a sports car that has issues. And so I think like comparing him to the Ford Mustang, and then you brought up Jeremy Bernard from Alabama, and he's like Mr. Reliable. He doesn't necessarily do anything super spectacular, but you can always count on him to kind of do his job and be where he needs to be. And likened him to like a Toyota Camry. And so I kind of like the comparison of those two wide receivers who should be available kind of in the second round there. And if you're looking at kind of what this team needs, we were just talking about with Casey Concepcion being like a explosive playmaker. I think Brazil out of Tennessee kind of fits that mold a little bit more, and I think that kind of leads into round three with a couple wide receivers that we enjoy. I know on your board you think Skylar Bell's a guy that's going to go kind of round two, but if he's there in round three, around pick 83, him and Bryce Lance out of North Dakota State, and Skylar Bell played for the University of Connecticut, who's in the national title game, or was in the national title. Actually, who won that game? Do you know? Out
Michigan
of
won last night. Yeah.
Michigan beat Connecticut. Okay, there you go. So,
Mhm.
news to me. I didn't pay attention to March Madness too much this year, but between those two wide receivers, they're both 24 years of age. You think Skylar Bell has as glimpses or shades of Steve Smith? I've heard comparisons of like he's a Jamar Chase light. That's another explosive playmaker that if you want to add a guy in the third round and you don't want to necessarily take one in the first round, that you could kind of get. And my question to you is if both of those players are there and available at pick 83, who are you turning the card in for and why?
It's gotta be Bell for me, and the Steve Smith part isn't necessarily his game, but more so like, he has, like, a souped up attitude when he plays, in a good way, not in like a "I'm gonna fight players" way, but, like, when he scores, he'll, like, yell and let you know about it, and for receivers, you kinda need that. You need a bit of a diva, to be or at least in your starting group, you need somebody like that that's gonna impact the game. Jamar Chase Light, I didn't want to give him that much praise, but he's pretty good. He can house some slants, he can win jump balls like that. And I'm just a really big fan. Kind of like a souped up Zay Flowers as well as somebody or kind of a comparison. Then you brought up Bryce Lance, right? The guy from North Dakota State who unsurprisingly is the brother of Trey Lance, who was North Dakota State's quarterback for so long. He reminds me a lot of Christian Watson, and I might be helmet scouting, and I told you that after I watched him, right? I was like, they use him a lot like Christian Watson. And then you posted one of your draft graphics that you've been doing over the past couple of weeks, and lo and behold, his usage and his yards per route run were almost identical to Christian Watson's. Let's see, 4 years ago now. So really like Bryce Lance, big, tall, fast receiver. That's a bit raw that can be refined. But if the Panthers like their big and tall receivers as they have over the past couple of years, Lance is a guy that can give you the juice.
I think he would complement T Mac and Jalen Coker extremely well because he does add that vertical threat. This is a guy that can blow past defenders and pretty much keep defenses honest, especially on that back end, as we're seeing multiple kind of 2 and 4 high shells to kind of limit explosives. He's somebody that is going to stretch the defense vertically and keep them honest. So moving forward, you like out of the couple rounds that we've talked about, Casey Concepcion, Oscar Delp, Skylar Bell, receivers that are going to help Bryce Young and help us evaluate kind of how much we should be investing when we extend them, because that is kind of like what Brant Tillis has alluded to, is that this is kind of the direction we're going to head as a franchise. We're going to continue building around this young playmaker. Who on day three do you think on the offensive side of the ball helps him the most, helps this offense the most develop? We have Brad Idzik, his first year as a play caller. Who do you think he needs on day three, based simply on 30 visits, some Zoom call pro day meetings that the team has had with players, and maybe a few guys that you've watched on tape that you think would be a good fit on day three? So we have a fourth round pick at pick 119, two fifths at 158, 159, 158 is, I believe, from the Minnesota Vikings, part of that Adam Thielen trade we had last year. And then we have a 6th round pick, pick 200. So we will probably end up moving at some point in the draft, whether it's day two, day three. So we will either have more or less picks when it comes down to the actual draft. But considering those spots, considering the players that we've looked at, who do you think the team should kind of gravitate towards?
Well, I'm always a guy who likes to draft running backs every year, even though we have plenty of running backs on the roster. You know my stance that you should always add one on day three every year just to have people. And if AJ Dillon doesn't make the squad, I think he will because we need a power back. Or if they don't like Trevor Etienne, they had a visit with Kalen Black from Indiana, national champion championship winning team this year. You wrote down Mike Washington. I'm a bit lower on Washington. I think he might fall to day 3, but he's big and fast, right? He was the guy at the combine who ran like a 4.33 or 4.31 or something at over, I think it was like 220 pounds. Like he's an athlete, right? So if you want an explosive runner, that's kind of the direction to go in. Then you talked about a lot of the centers, and I think that even though these centers aren't necessarily world beaters, like if somebody were to fall to like round 4 or something like that, maybe I know Connor Liu is pretty high up on people's boards, but I think his injuries are going to push him down a bit. The Auburn center, or Logan Jones from Iowa, Jake Slaughter from Florida. I'm a big fan of their center. I think any of these guys would be a useful dart throw for the Panthers this year because while Luke Fortner, I think, could be a solid starter, we need somebody long term, right? We can't keep paying free agents market value when you already have the most expensive offensive line. So multiple, or not multiple center dart throws, but some centers, right? Maybe a tackle at that point as well if they don't go tackle earlier. And I'm trying to think who would be like a sleeper maybe. I like Marlon Klein, the Michigan tight end. I don't think he's like Colston Loveland or like that level or AJ Barner, but I think he has some raw athleticism and stuff there that he could grow into. Who's another? Dion Burks is somebody who, as of today, and this is April 7th, he's having a 30 visit in Charlotte today. Pretty small, but I think he's a multiple receiver, kind of like a gadget guy that they could use as a depth chart guy there. But there are a lot of swings that they could take. And then I guess the last point being, we've hosted what 3 quarterbacks that would be day 3 or undrafted level quarterbacks to be a long term developmental backup. I don't like any of Haynes King. I'm not opposed to taking late in the draft, but I'm not a huge fan of Baron Morton or Diego Pavia. I think that if you want to take a day 3 dice roll on a QB, you should do so with somebody who's a little bit more juiced up, maybe like Talon Green from Arkansas, if he makes it, like huge athlete. Cole Payton from North Dakota State, he was the guy throwing to Bryce Lance this year. Really raw player, but he's got some stuff there too. Lefty, which would be interesting because you have a right-handed starter, but there are a lot of later QBs. Sawyer Robertson's another one that I wouldn't mind taking a chance on, like as a long-term developmental guy.
And I'm sure some of these quarterbacks that they've had in the building are not going to be drafted. This isn't like a super deep quarterback class, so to speak. These are just names that are available. And so I feel like when you make the move that you did in free agency for a Kenny Pickett, you trade away Andy Dalton, you're looking for a training camp body, somebody that, yes, you can develop maybe on the practice squad. And so simply bringing in these guys, seeing who's a good fit, building a rapport with one of these quarterbacks that you can sign as an undrafted free agent, I think will probably be the direction. I would be surprised if we use draft capital to get a third string quarterback, but you never know based on what the evaluations are, based on how their board all kind of falls throughout the draft process. But I think that's a good direction to head. What is kind of your takeaway from the offensive side of the ball before we transition to the defensive side next week in the direction the Panthers should take? Like ultimately, we're not going to go offense every single pick, but do you think there are select rounds that, yes, we need to target an offensive player on these days because the talent at these picks, based on what we think will be available, is just too good to pass up?
I think that's a perfect segue here into perfect takes. It's 2 perfects there. And I guess my take will be that the Panthers are going to take an offensive player on day 1 with round 1. I don't know if it's pick 19. I don't know if they'll trade back. I can't imagine that they would trade forward unless like somebody like Sonny Styles, the Ohio State linebacker, were to fall out of the top 10. But I think, and you and I were talking about this before we hopped on to record, that the Panthers' strategy, at least over the last 2 years, where this regime has been in play, has been spend on defense. The first year didn't count because they had to remake the offensive line. It was the worst in the league. But spend on defense in free agency and draft high offensive players with premium picks. And I think that's going to continue to be the strategy. I think they're going to take an offensive player in round 1. And I know that's a wide net that I'm casting here, but looking at this team, to me, the big needs are on the offensive side of the ball, and you never want to draft for need, but Dave Canales said, we're not drafting for depth at 19. We're drafting a starter. We're drafting somebody who's going to play in his rookie year. And to me, I think most of the offensive prospects fit that bill more so than the defensive players, unless a top 10 guy falls. If Caleb Downs makes it to pick 15, maybe they go up and get him, or Sonny Styles or something. But I think it's ultimately going to be an offensive player. There's a reason that they're hosting offensive players in that range for 30 visits and not defensive players that we know about. There's a reason that Joe Gilbert, the offensive line coach, has been at all the first rounders pro days, and he's the guy working out all these tackles and drills and stuff. I think it's going to be an offensive player. And if I had to bet, I think it would be a receiver or a tackle.
That goes in line with a perfect take I had the last time we were on air, that we are going to take a tackle at pick 19. So if it's an offensive player and it is a tackle, and we get an offensive tackle to eventually be Taylor Moton's replacement, potentially the guy that replaces Ike Ekwonu, depending on how he comes back from his injury, I think it's a good direction. It's a good way to address a future need while not being pressed that he has to start day one. And we talked about that a lot, about, hey, we need to go out and we need to sign a tackle. And I think when we got Rasheed Walker, that pretty much took a lot of weight off a lot of fans' chest in terms of, like, we can't go into the season kind of having question marks around that left tackle situation. And so I think not feeling the pressure will help whatever rookie we take, if we do take an offensive tackle at 19, develop the right way. My take, kind of going off yours, and it's more just based on the talent that's there on kind of like the third round, or could be in the third round. So I think we go wide receiver then. I think it would be a little rich to take a couple of the wide receivers that'll probably be there at 51, but 83, I do really feel like, based on just like consensus, like a Skylar Bell is going to be there, a Bryce Lance is going to be there. You might have somebody else that you like there at pick 83. But I feel like if you go offensive tackle in the first round, you go a defensive player in the second, and then you get another wide receiver in the third, you feel very comfortable about how this team is coming together. And again, it's just taking prospects and flyers on day three that you feel like fit a need or a role on your team, that they can develop as backups, as special team players, and really allow them to shine while not being forced to start. Because I think, like, when we took Jimmy Horn last year, there was like almost an expectation with Xavier Legette not doing well. It's like, hey, he needs to step up and make more plays, but it's letting him take a back seat and letting those kind of players take a back seat and really learn and develop, so that maybe in year two, year three, they can step up when there are injuries or people leave in free agency, to kind of fill a bigger role and have had that time to develop and become the player that we envisioned that they could become.
For sure. This is a developmental staff, right? That's one of the reasons Dave Canales isn't calling plays anymore, so he can help every member of the team, not just the quarterback and the offense. So I could certainly see receiver in round three. I think that's a good reach, or a good shot, because I really think that they're going to want to go offensive tackle early. Maybe they shock both of us, and we'll talk about next week some of the players that they could go in round one. Any players you want to stake your claim on the offensive side of the ball? I'm going to say Bell, Skylar Bell. That's probably my favorite receiver in the class.
I have to. One of the guys I work with during one of my jobs, he played against Casey Concepcion in high
Mm.
school, and so I think him being a local kid, and there being a lot of buzz with a lot of analysts going like, "Hey, this is like one of my favorite wide receivers," and just knowing he provides an explosive element, I would not be upset if we took him at 19, or if we're able to trade back a couple picks and take him in the 20s. Like, that is a player that I think will add juice to the wide receiver room, add an element that is not currently there. And obviously, T Mac is a very explosive player, but he's more that guy that's. I would lump him in more with possession wide receivers than I would say like an explosive playmaker over the top. And similar with like Jalen Coker, that's his kind of prototype as well. And so getting somebody else that adds a different dimension, I think, would be huge for this offense, especially when explosives have been hard to come by in recent seasons.
For sure. And if anything, even if he doesn't work out, he would sell tickets because he's the local guy. And over the past half decade or so, the Panthers have leaned in the local direction. I think that's going to do it for us. So next week, like you said, kind of a similar rundown here, except we'll be talking about defensive prospects, not offensive players. And then the following week will be draft week, and we will have is it we're going to do a full mock draft or just a Panthers mock draft? We'll decide by
We'll,
that
we'll,
point.
we'll do we'll do a full mock draft. We'll go 1 through 32, and we'll do it kind of like what we did today of what we think each team will do, and
Mhm.
that if that player isn't available or if they don't decide to go that route, what would be a good like kind of option B. So like I think at the end of it, we'll have like kind of like 1A, 1B of what we think teams will do throughout the draft process, and we'll see how that all lines up and works out. But again, I think we're going to be trying to shoot for like a projection of what will happen as
Mhm.
opposed to what we would do if we were GMs.
Gotcha. So no instance of Sonny Styles making it to 19, unfortunately. But until then and until next week, you can find us on the socials, Spotify, Apple Podcast, and again, until next week and when we talk about defenders, keep pounding.